Hello, my name is Marianne and I'm an alcoholic. I'd like to welcome you to Recovery in Action, Life on Life's Terms. This is an open meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. We're glad you're all here, especially newcomers, in keeping with our singleness of purpose and our third tradition, which states that the only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. We ask that all who participate confine their discussion to their problems with alcohol. This is an open Big Book step study meeting where we discuss the 12 steps of recovery as they're written in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, with the focus on their application in everyday life and recovery. This is the 10th session of the 5th cycle of the workshop that was presented on April 6, 2024, where we completed step 10. Next week, we'll continue with step 11. If you would like to contribute to the 7th tradition, you may do so using the QR codes displayed. Contributions are applied towards the group's expenses and support our service offices. Recordings of the workshop are available, and if you would like to be placed on the distribution list, please send an email to recoveryinaction462@gmail.com to receive the links. These links are unlisted and not public. I request that you not share them at the public level or post on any social media sites. The workshop typically begins with a brief meditation in which an inspirational music video is played. Because of copyright restrictions, it cannot be on the video. However, a link is provided, and I suggest you take a minute, view the video, and take a brief meditation for yourself before you begin the workshop. As the recording begins, the workshop is already in session. Feel free to contact me if you have any additional questions or require my assistance further. I hope you enjoy the workshop. Another custom of this group is to start the workshop by saying the full version of the Serenity Prayer. We're all familiar with the first part, but many of us are unaware that there is a second part to it, and I believe it's this second part of the prayer that reflects what recovery is all about. So if you would all please join me in the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as the pathway to peace, taking as he did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen. All right, so what we're doing in this workshop is we are using the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous to help us become recovered from alcoholism. I can never be cured of the allergic reaction that happens as a result of drinking alcohol, but I can be recovered from the mental obsession that keeps telling me that it's okay to drink and makes me never stop thinking about wanting to drink. And that's what the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous teaches me, because the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous is the book of instructions on how to work the 12 steps. And the 12 steps are the set of instructions on how to get rid of the things that are blocking us off from our higher power, how to get connected to God, and how to stay surrendered from alcohol, which is making my life unmanageable. So we need to be aware, however, that merely reading the Big Book without experiencing it is useless, because we can't learn how to swim without jumping in the water. We can't learn how to ride a bicycle without taking off the training wheels and getting the distinction of balance. We can't learn how to play the piano without taking lessons and practicing and practicing and practicing. So when we talk about the cover page of the Big Book, it states that this is the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. The next question begging to be answered is, well, what is the definition of recovered? And the definition is that the problem is removed. I do not have to make a choice whether I drink or not because I don't even think about drinking. I automatically turn to God instead of alcohol when I'm upset. Alcohol is no longer an option to solve any of my problems. Selfishness and self centeredness are gone. I'm no longer angry, fearful, or harmful. And my old destructive ways of thinking and acting have been replaced by new peaceful ones. The 10th step promise, which is on page 84, has now become a way of life. And that 10th step promise, there's a lot of promises in the big book, not just the 9th step promises. There's lots of promises, but the 10th step promise states that we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol, for by this time sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude toward liquor, has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That's the miracle of it. We're not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we've been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We've not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We're neither cocky nor are we afraid. That's our experience. That's how we react as long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. Then when we go to page 27, it defines recovered as ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. Additionally, in the appendix, where in the section on the spiritual experience, it gives a definition of recovered as a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from alcoholism has manifested itself among us in many different forms. Then, when we go to the foreword of the first edition, it states, "We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. To show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book." It later goes on to say that the only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. However, the desire to stop drinking is not the only requirement to become recovered. There's other things involved, such as being willing and actually doing everything that the big book says to do. So this is where we started, and we covered this. We went to step 1. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. And as we understood, now we had the self-knowledge, we admitted we're powerless over alcohol, we can't drink. And however, we found out that as a real alcoholic, the only thing self-knowledge does is make me realize I cannot take one drink without being physically driven to take one drink after another. This then allows me the opportunity, if I'm spiritually fit, to pass on that first drink. And I can only do this on a continuous basis if I'm connected to my higher power. So once we have to understand, well, what is a higher power? We were at step 2, where we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Then once we decided what that power was for us, we were ready to take step 3. Step 3, which is only a decision. We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. And this is where we offer ourselves to God. This is the 3rd step prayer, where we're asking God to take away our difficulties, to relieve us of the bondage of self, so that we may do God's will. And part of the process of getting ready to do that brought us to the fourth step, which was made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And the inventory consisted of 4 separate inventories: resentments, fears, and 2 for harms. Harms excluding our sexual behavior and harms including our sex conduct. And then we started looking at where we found that in most cases, it was our self-esteem, our pocketbooks, our ambitions, or our personal relations that were hurt or threatened. So we wrote on our grudge list the opposite each name for our injuries. Was it our self-esteem? Was it our security, our ambitions, our personal or sex relations that had been interfered with? And what we found was that these were the parts of self. It was our self-esteem, how we feel about ourselves, our pride, our pocketbook, anything having to do with money, our emotional security, how safe we feel in the world, our ambitions, our plans, both immediate and down the road, our personal relationships, how we interact with others, and our sex relationships. And we looked at where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, and frightened. Although a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. So when we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set these matters straight. And what came out was we identified 5 main character defects in that I'm selfish, I'm dishonest, I'm self-seeking, I'm frightened, and I'm inconsiderate. It's all about me. So these were the 5 main character defects we identified. And then we also broke them down into some other character defects, which described it a little bit better. Then once we did all this, we were at step 5, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. We looked at our character defects here. Then step 6, we were entirely ready to have God remove all of these defects of character. And this is where we started to ask God to remove them, ask God for his help. And then step 7 is we humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. And when we're in step 7, this is where we actually start to do it. We don't do it in step 3. Now we're starting in step 7. We're asking God to remove our shortcomings, which is where we say the 7th step prayer. My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me. All means all, the good and the bad. And I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. This is where we're living life. This is where life happens. The reality, however, is that our character defects are not going to be lifted all at once, but as we're living life, we are continuously nudged in the right direction. So the nudge from God comes in our morning prayers, where we ask God to stop us from being whatever that character defect we identified is. Stop me from being this character defect and teach me to be the asset, and do each one individually and separately. So for example, we might say, please God, stop me from being lazy and teach me to be someone who does what's needed to be done immediately. Please God, stop me from being jealous and teach me to be happy for other people. Please God, stop me from being mean-spirited and teach me to be kind. And throughout the day, whenever these character defects crop up, and they will, immediately stop, take a deep breath, ask God to stop you from being that character defect and teach you to be the opposite, and actually name the character defect and its opposite. And then, and the most important part is, Act as if you're someone who has that character asset. So no, God will not immediately remove all your defects of character. Nature abhors a vacuum. If the character defect is removed and you don't have the right thing to replace it with, you could replace it with something that will not enhance your life. And that could happen and as a replacement. So God will give you many opportunities to practice the character asset. And when he thinks you've learned enough and practiced the opposite enough, then he'll remove that character defect. So the use of step 7 in step 10 is where the remaining character defects get removed. That's part of the reason why I talk a little bit more about this, because we're going to be looking at this when we get into this 10th step. Step 7 starts the process, and some character defects may be removed or diminished within a very short period of time after starting step 7. The use of step 7 in step 10 is where the remaining ones get removed. What we're dealing with are the habits that have shaped our lives. The habit is the past action that's repeated over and over and over again, that it becomes automatic. And with alcoholics, our fight or flight response gets triggered so easily, and our character defects have been repeated so often, there are automatic, unconscious response to having a part of ourselves hurt, threatened, or interfered with. So at a point in our life, these worked to protect us, but now as we're getting sober, when they come into play to protect us, um, even though they were appropriate at a particular point in our life, they've outlived their usefulness and now they cause problems for us. So we went through the stimulus response, but we looked at the stimulus and the response, and we looked at the 4 endowments of the human personality and how this is related to our response when we separate that stimulus from the response. And that's where the serenity prayer comes in. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Am I falling back into old patterns of behavior, or do I need to change some of these things that I can? So step 7 and the use of step 7 in step 10 teaches us not to react inappropriately to everyday situations we might misinterpret as being threatening. Someone looks at us sideways in a meeting and we think that they're talking about us, or someone's talking to someone in the back of the room and we of course think it's about us. We misinterpret everyday situations and we overreact. Step 7 starts to teach us the things that are unmanageable in our lives, the things that upset us and the things that we're afraid of, and all of them are caused by our distortion of what's actually going on around us. We give more credit and attention to those things than they deserve, and our character defects come into play to try to protect us. So this is what we're living with and dealing with every day, every day. And this brings us to step 8, made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. And then step 9, made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except whenever to do so would injure them or others. Once we do step 9, we are done spending any more time feeling guilty. If some of the people we've harmed choose to hold on to their pain, or if they choose to bear a grudge, even in the face of our sincere request for forgiveness, we must realize that we're free of the burden of the wrong, and whatever they do, they do. We can't control whatever it is they do. And when you've completed the previous 8 steps, you're going to be a different person than who you were at step 1. Each step gives you the strength to do the next. And after doing step 7, some of your character defects will have either been removed or diminished, and you'll have the experience of acting as if you're the opposite. And this is good because then you'll not react inappropriately or retaliate if any of step 9 doesn't go smoothly. So when you've done step 8, you're going to want to set right the wrongs from the past. And because you now have God in your life, you begin to realize that the outcome of everything, including your step 9 amends, are totally in your higher power's hands. And by this point in your recovery, it's absolutely okay with you, which brings us to the 9th step promises, which I'm not going to read them. We hear them all the time, but it's basically saying that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. And they are fulfilled among us, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, but they will always materialize if we work for them. So this is part of living life, living life, living life. And that takes us to step 10, continue to take personal inventory. And when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. So 7, 8, 9, and 10 is going to be going on all the time. That's what continued means. We don't stop. We don't graduate. We continue to do this. Step 10 is where we put all the footwork we've been doing in the previous 9 steps into action. And the next instruction is on page 84, which states, this thought brings us to step 10, which suggests we continue to take personal inventory and continue to set right any new mistakes as we go along. We vigorously commenced this way of living as we cleaned up the past. This is where we've entered the world of the spirit. And our next function is to grow in understanding and effectiveness. This is not an overnight matter. It should continue for our lifetime. We don't stop. We continue to watch for selfishness, dishonesty, resentment, and fear. And when these crop up, we ask God at once to remove them. We discuss them with someone immediately and make amends quickly if we have harmed anyone. Then we resolutely turn our thoughts to someone we can help. Love and tolerance is our code. That last one, that tolerance can sometimes get to us. I mean, I know it gets to me sometimes where I find myself getting intolerant. I'm sitting at a meeting and I don't like the way the person is sharing, and I start becoming intolerant in my head. And it's like, sit there and listen, Mary Ann, stop judging this person and listen to them. That's where the tolerance comes in. I have to work on that all the time. It basically states we ask God at once to remove them. This means we go to God at once. It doesn't mean we tell God to immediately remove our character defects. It just means we go to him at once. So you do a step 10 as soon as you notice that twinge that tells you something's not quite right. To clarify this, the nightly review is not step 10. The nightly review is part of step 11. Step 10 is done immediately. Step 10 is your higher power's way of giving you a chance to act as if you're the opposite of your character defects. God will not remove any character defect until he believes you've learned enough and practiced the opposite enough. And step 10 gives you many opportunities to practice the asset. The important part of step 10 is to realize that whatever is happening in your life is just a way for you to learn to be the opposite of that character defect. So once you get to step 10, you stop doing the step 7 morning prayer of asking for the character defects to be removed and taught their opposites, because in step 10, God decides which character defects he wants you to work on. And he's going to give you the opportunities to learn whatever lessons that you're supposed to do. So step 10 is doing the same things we did in step 4 through 9. But what we did originally for steps 4 through 9 was used to clean up the things from our past. Step 10 is used immediately to clean up things as they happen from this point forward. So, step 10 is at the exact moment that you're angry, worried, afraid, about to harm someone, or have harmed someone, you immediately do steps 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 5. So, if you're upset with someone, you immediately do the resentment inventory and stop being angry. If you're worried or afraid, you immediately do the fear inventory and stop being frightened. If you're about to harm someone or are harming someone, immediately do the harm inventory and stop hurting another person. Then you move to step 6. Do you want the character defects you just found removed? If yes, move on to step 7. Ask God to remove these defects and to teach you to be the opposite, and then act as if you're someone who has these character assets. Now, if you have harmed someone, be willing to make amends in step 8. Then do step 9. If an apology is needed, make it. And then, whether or not an apology was necessary, make plans on how you're going to amend your ways so that you do not repeat the same negative behavior in the future. And then incorporate these new behaviors into your daily life. Next, you do step 5. Call your sponsor or someone and say, "Hi, this is Mary Ann. I was just angry with someone. I just harmed someone. I was just afraid of something." For a fear or a harm, after telling your sponsor the character defects, you can, if you want to, tell your sponsor what you're going to do to incorporate this into your daily life. So, step 10 is a very important step because this is where you start to become recovered. An important thing to remember is that when you start doing step 10, your life is not all of a sudden going to hell. What's happening is God's putting you in situations where you can learn to be the opposite of your character defects. So you want to learn those lessons quickly because each successive lesson may not be as gentle as the previous one. Remember, you made a decision to let God be in charge in step 3. You gave God permission to mold you into who he wants you to be in step 7. In step 10, he starts that transformation and will do what he needs to do in order to get your attention. So pay attention. By doing steps 1 through 9 properly, you've removed the things blocking you off from your higher power. And now there's nothing interfering with you receiving messages, lessons in step 10, and guidance in step 11. All of this from your higher power. So note, everything happening in step 10 is from your higher power to either teach you something you need to learn, or even to protect you from something in the future. And without this realization, there's nothing to be upset about. The gift for believing this is peace of mind and finding a quick and easy solution to every situation you find yourself in. So we have step 10 worksheets, which also are on the Google Drive, and they're also in the workbook. They're basically a duplicate, mainly of the 4th step inventory forms, except that they're for the 10th step. So step 10 is used the moment anything disturbs your peace of mind. And it doesn't matter if it's a small inconvenience or a giant hit to your ego or something in between. Any resentment, fear and or harm, disturbing your peace of mind, interferes with your connection to your higher power. So you do a step 10 for resentment whenever you're upset or feel hurt, a fear whenever you're worried, concerned, or afraid, and or a harm whenever you have a mean thought or actually hurt someone. So when we're looking at the 10th step uh, worksheets, the first one we're going to look at here is for resentments. And these are the instructions. So you would list in column 1 who you're upset with. Then in column 2, you would write what they did. In column 3, you check off which parts of self were affected, whether it was your self-esteem, your pocketbook, your emotional security, your ambitions, or your personal or sex relationships. Then in column 4, you write how you got the ball rolling. And then in column 5, you put a check mark in the appropriate column if you were either selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, inconsiderate, and then, if appropriate, any other character defects that might have been triggered. And then the next thing you do is you read the resentment forward, and then you reverse it. You reverse the resentment like we did in step 4. And does it make sense? Does it ring true for you? If it does make sense, then you move on to step 6 and ask yourself if you want to have God remove the character defect you just found. If the answer is yes, then you do a step 7 and you ask God to remove the character defect or the defects and teach you to be the opposite. And then you act as if you have that character asset. So that's for your reason if you have the resentment inventory for step 10. Next, we've got the harms inventory. And for the harms inventory, again, we're looking at it from this perspective. Harms to others excluding sex or harms to others using sex. It's basically the same thing. So you do a harm inventory, and basically when you have a mean thought or you're actually causing a harm. In column 1, you list who you've harmed. If you did the step 10 resentment inventory, you can look at column 4 of the resentment inventory and see if what was listed there was a harm. If so, you would add that to your harm inventory. Then in column 2, you write how you harmed them. If this is an inventory using sex, you also ask yourself if you created jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness. In column 3, you list what parts of self got satisfied by doing this. Remember, for the resentment inventory, the parts of self are wounded. For the harms inventory, the parts of self are satisfied. So what parts of self were satisfied by doing this? Was it your self-esteem, how you feel about yourself, or your pocketbook, your money, or anything of a material nature, your emotional security, how safe you feel in the world, your ambitions, your plans for the future, your personal relationships, how I deal with and feel about others, or your sex relationships. Then in column 4, you write down what you should have done differently. And then also in column 4, you will write down what you're going to do in the future when this happens. And then you would add whatever character defects allowed you to do that harm. Were you selfish, dishonest, self-seeking, frightened, inconsiderate, or go to the list of the more specific ones and list them there. Then remember, if this is an inventory on harms using sex, remember to ask yourself if you created jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness. And then look at column 5 and ask yourself if you want to have God remove the character defects you just found. If yes, ask God to remove the character defect and teach you to be the opposite. Then act as if you have that character defect. Immediately apologize to the person as long as it doesn't create another harm, saying something along the lines of, I'm sorry for what I did, which would have been in column 2. I should not have done that, which is where we're in column 4. I shouldn't have done that. And in the future, I'm going to do this. And if needed, you would make any necessary restitution. Then you amend your ways so that you don't cause this harm again. In the case, in case it's a driver in front of me, for example, I would immediately stop honking the horn at them, stop waving my arms at them or whatever. And I wouldn't ride up on their tail. I would sit back and just allow them to drive however they need to be comfortable. So, what you want to look at is ask yourself if you want to have God remove these character defects you just found. If yes, you ask God to remove those character defects, and teach you to be the opposite. Then you act as if you possess those character defects. Immediately apologize to the person, again, as long as it doesn't create another harm. And you would say, I'm sorry, I did that. In the future, I'm going to do that. How can I make restitution? And then you change your ways so that you don't do this in the future. And then we already did that. Okay. And then next we do the fear inventory. And you would do a fear inventory whenever you say, I'm worried or I'm afraid or I'm concerned. And in column 1, you write what you're afraid of. Also look at your step 10 resentment inventory. And if your step 10 harms inventory, and look at column 5, was frightened checked off on either one of those. And if frightened was checked off, then you would add these to the fear inventory. In column 2, you write what you're afraid of. In column 3, this is where it's a little bit different from some of the other ones that I've seen. But in column 3 of the fear inventory, I'm asking myself, do I realize that I'm relying on myself rather than on my higher power? And I just check off yes or no. In column 4, I write down everything I can think of that I can do to make sure that this fear doesn't happen again. And in column 5, I write down the character defects that would keep me from doing what I need to do in column 4. Then I go back and I review what I wrote in column 4 to see what footwork I need to do to minimize the chance that this fear will happen again. I want to make this column is my action plan of the things that I'm going to start doing in the future. So I look at these character defects listed in column 5 and ask myself if I want to have God remove these character defects. If yes, I ask God to remove the character defects and teach me to be the opposite so that I get that. I get that removed. But what I do again is I act as if I have that character asset. So after completing the steps 4, 6, 7, and 9 parts of step 10, for any or all of my inventories, I need to do a step 5, which would be, again, call my sponsor or someone with these character defects and talk about it to someone. Every resentment and every harm is ultimately caused by a fear. So while the step 10 fear inventory is used every time you're worried, concerned, or frightened, it should also be used as a companion inventory when you do a resentment or harm inventory. Now, some people carry copies of these forms around with them for quick access. Another way to keep might be to carry a small pad of paper and draw the lines for your columns. Um, some people just after years they can do it in their head, which is fine. Another option for those of us that are technologically savvy, there are apps you can download on your phone. I just put 3 of them up here. You can see this is the 12-step toolkit, which is here. You can see the inventory forms here. Then this is, I think it's Everything AA. And this is my spiritual companion, which you have your daily reflections. And there's other apps out there as well that kind of make things a little easier for us as we go through this. But as the result of years of being willing to follow these instructions and actually do the work is basically what brought me to where I am. And I'm not unique or anything like that. Um, Anyone who works the steps as outlined in the big book will reach the place that Bill describes as being rocketed to the 4th dimension. And that will be reflected not only in everything they do and say, but also in every one of their relationships and how they lead their lives. And I know for myself, it wasn't until I actually sat down and followed this process where I experienced that. I would have little experiences as I went along, but it wasn't until I actually sat down and uh, did this process that I actually experienced that. Now, just one little thing is the difference between steps 10 and 11. The important difference between steps 10 and 11 is that step 10 is done immediately. And it's done immediately to clean things up as they occur. Step 11 is done at night as a review. So step 10 is a continuous, ongoing fine tuning of who. Step 10 is a continuous fine tuning of who I'm supposed to be. It's God's way of putting me in the situations He wants me to be in to learn certain lessons. The difference between step 10, which is done immediately, and step 11, which is reviewing, planning, and being guided, is that step 10 is where God teaches me lessons, and step 11 is where I put those lessons into practice. So when I go from step 10 to step 11, I want to be content with whatever life brings to me. And everything is an opportunity to deepen my connection with my higher power, which is the thinking that moves me into step 11. Thank you so much for your participation. I hope you enjoyed the workshop. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. And now, please join me in our closing prayer, which is St. Faustina's prayer for mercy. Eternal God, in whom mercy is endless and the treasury of compassion inexhaustible, look kindly upon us and increase your mercy in us, that in difficult moments we might not despair nor become despondent, but with great confidence submit ourselves to your holy will, which is love and mercy itself. Amen.